Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the HMS Horizon and watched the stars streak past the viewport. 5 years had passed since humanity discovered faster-than-light travel, and the universe had opened before them like a book waiting to be read. The Horizon was not a warship, but a diplomatic vessel carrying hopes and dreams of an entire species eager to meet their cosmic neighbors. Jake was a military man, but this mission was about peace and building bridges between worlds. Ambassador Lisa Grant reviewed her notes for the 100th time in her quarters. She had spent months preparing for this moment when humanity would finally meet the Galactic Council. The Council was an alliance of 47 alien species that had ruled this region of space for thousands of years. They maintained order and facilitated trade between countless worlds. Lisa hoped that humanity could join this grand civilization and learn from species far older and wiser than themselves. The HMS Horizon approached Convergence Point, which was a massive space station floating in neutral territory. The station was bigger than anything humanity had ever built, with spiraling towers and docking bays that could accommodate vessels of every shape and size. Jake ordered his crew to proceed slowly and broadcast their peaceful intentions on all frequencies. The station's traffic control directed them to a docking port, and within the hour the human delegation was walking through corridors filled with aliens of every description. Lisa led the delegation into the council chamber, which was a vast circular room, with seats arranged in tiers rising toward a domed ceiling. Representatives from dozens of species watched as the humans entered. Some showed curiosity while others displayed what could only be described as contempt. At the center of the chamber sat High Archon Velnasir of the Zenthari Empire. The Zenthari were tall beings with metallic skin and eyes that glowed with an inner light. Velnasir radiated authority and arrogance in equal measure. The meeting began with formal introductions. Lisa spoke of humanity's desire for friendship and cooperation. She explained that humans had built 3 small colonies on nearby worlds and sought only to live in peace with their galactic neighbors. She offered to share human culture and technology in exchange for knowledge and trade agreements. Her words were measured and respectful, showing the careful diplomacy that Earth had hoped would win the Council's favor. High Archon Velnasir listened with barely concealed disdain. When Lisa finished speaking, he rose from his seat and his voice echoed through the chamber. The Zenthari declared that humanity was a primitive species that had stumbled upon technology they did not deserve. He stated that human expansion into space was unauthorized and illegal under Council law. The Council had rules, and humanity had broken them by colonizing worlds without permission. Lisa tried to explain that humans had no knowledge of these laws and had acted in good faith. She argued that surely the Council could make allowances for a species that had only just reached the stars. Velnasir dismissed her words with a wave of his hand. He announced that humanity had 2 choices: surrender all faster-than-light technology and accept status as a protectorate under Zenthari control, or face the consequences of their defiance. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Some council members seemed uncomfortable with Velnasir's harsh demands, but none spoke in humanity's defense. Lisa felt her heart sink as she realized that this meeting was not a negotiation, but an ultimatum. She thought of the families living on New Terra and the other colonies who had left Earth to build new lives among the stars. She could not surrender their freedom without a fight. Lisa stood tall and addressed the council. She thanked them for their time but politely refused their demands. Humanity would not give up their freedom or their future based on laws they had never been told existed. She proposed instead a period of dialogue where both sides could reach a fair agreement. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath her words that made it clear humans would not simply submit. Velnasir's eyes flared with anger. He declared that humanity had made their choice and would now learn the price of refusing the Council's mercy. The Archon turned to his military advisors and issued orders in the Zenthari language. Within moments, alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. Lisa demanded to know what was happening, but Velnasir simply smiled a cold and terrible expression. Jake Morrison received the emergency transmission on the horizon before the diplomats even left the council chamber. The message came from New Terra, and it was fragmentary and desperate. Zenthari warships had appeared in orbit without warning and were firing on the colony. Jake felt ice flood his veins as he heard the screams and explosions in the background of the transmission. The voice of Governor Pete Watson cut out mid-sentence, and then there was only static. Jake made a decision that would cost him his life but save thousands. He ordered the Horizon to jump immediately to New Terra, even though his small diplomatic vessel was no match for a Zenthari battle group. His crew obeyed without hesitation because they all understood what was at stake. The Horizon emerged from faster-than-light travel to witness a nightmare unfolding below. New Terra was burning. Zenthari warships hung in orbit like birds of prey raining destruction on the surface. Cities that had taken years to build were disappearing in clouds of fire and debris. Jake could see evacuation shuttles rising from the planet trying desperately to escape the bombardment. Many were making it to space, but the Zenthari fighters were hunting them down one by one. Jake opened a channel to the Zenthari fleet commander and demanded they cease fire on civilians. The Zenthari officer laughed and told Jake that this was a lesson humanity needed to learn. Species that defied the Council would be crushed and forgotten. Jake closed the channel and turned to his weapons officer. The Horizon had only light defensive armaments, but Jake ordered them to engage the Zenthari fighters that were attacking the evacuation shuttles. The small human ship threw itself at the enemy with reckless courage. Jake's crew managed to destroy 3 Zenthari fighters and damage 2 more before the inevitable happened. A Zenthari destroyer turned its attention to the Horizon and opened fire with weapons that could crack a moon. Jake's last act was to broadcast a message to all the evacuation shuttles telling them to run and not look back. The HMS Horizon exploded in a flash of light that briefly rivaled the sun. But Jake's sacrifice bought precious time. 50,000 colonists escaped in the shuttles and jumped away to safety before the Zenthari could stop them. Behind them, New Terra died as orbital bombardment turned the surface into molten glass. 150,000 human souls perished in what the Zenthari considered a minor disciplinary action. The survivors fled back to Earth carrying news of the massacre. The galaxy had shown humanity its true face, and it was far uglier than anyone had imagined. The Galactic Council was not a beacon of civilization, but a tyranny maintained through fear and overwhelming force. Humanity had reached for the stars, seeking friendship, but had found only enemies who viewed them as insects to be crushed. Word of the attack spread across Earth within hours. People watched in horror as footage from the survivors showed the destruction of New Terra. The images of burning cities and civilians being killed from orbit ignited something deep in the human spirit. Grief turned to rage, and rage turned to determination. Humanity would not beg for mercy or submit to slavery. If the galaxy wanted war, then Earth would give them a war they would never forget. President Helen Carter stood before the United Earth Assembly in Geneva, and the weight of the entire species rested on her shoulders. Behind her, on massive screens, played the footage from New Terra, showing cities burning and people dying under alien bombardment. The representatives from every nation sat in stunned silence as they watched their fellow humans being murdered from space. Helen had seen war before in her years as a military officer, but nothing had prepared her for this moment when humanity faced extinction at the hands of beings from beyond the stars. Helen began to speak, and her voice carried to every corner of Earth through broadcasts that reached billions of people. She told them that the Galactic Council had shown humanity no mercy and would offer none in the future. The Council viewed humans as primitive insects to be controlled or destroyed. Helen said that Earth had 2 choices: surrender and live as slaves under alien rule, or fight back with everything they had. Her next words would be remembered throughout human history. She declared that humanity would never kneel before tyrants, and that Earth would prepare for war. The Assembly voted unanimously to grant Helen emergency powers to defend the planet. She immediately appointed General Marcus Hayes as Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces. Marcus was a brilliant strategist who had studied every major conflict in human history, from ancient battles to modern warfare. He understood that humanity could not win through conventional means because the Council had thousands of ships and technology far more advanced than anything Earth possessed. Marcus knew that humans would need to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than any enemy they had ever faced. General Hayes wasted no time mobilizing Earth's resources. He called together the greatest scientific minds from every nation and gave them a single mission: turn every experimental technology into a weapon that could kill alien invaders. At a secure facility in the Canadian Rockies, a team led by Dr. Sophie Blake began working around the clock on what they called Project Prometheus. Sophie was a quantum physicist who had been researching theoretical weapons that most people thought were impossible. Now she had unlimited funding and the full support of every government on Earth. Sophie's team made breakthrough after breakthrough, as desperation drove innovation at a pace never seen before. They developed kinetic railguns that could fire projectiles at a fraction of light speed. These weapons used simple mass and velocity instead of energy beams, which meant they could punch through the energy shields that protected Council ships. Sophie also designed gravity mines that could be deployed around jump points to trap enemy fleets. The weapons were crude compared to Council technology, but they were effective, and that was all that mattered. Chief Engineer Ryan Foster oversaw the conversion of Earth's entire industrial capacity to military production. Factories that once made consumer goods now produced weapons and armor. Shipyards that built commercial vessels were retooled to construct warships. Ryan pushed the workforce to their limits and beyond. People worked 18-hour shifts knowing that every day of delay meant the Council fleet was one day closer. Within 3 months, Earth's orbital shipyards were launching a new warship every single day. The new human warships were smaller than Council vessels, but they were built for speed and maneuverability. Each ship carried a crew trained specifically for combat in zero gravity. The hulls were reinforced with composite armor that could absorb tremendous punishment. Human engineers designed the ships to be modular, so damaged sections could be replaced quickly. Every vessel was equipped with the new kinetic weapons and enough missiles to level a small moon. These were not exploration ships, but instruments of war designed by a species that had spent its entire history perfecting the art of killing. While Earth built its military machine, Lieutenant Kate Morgan volunteered for the most dangerous mission of the war. Kate was an intelligence officer who spoke 4 Earth languages and had a gift for blending into any environment. General Hayes needed information about Council fleet movements, supply lines, and military capabilities. Kate agreed to infiltrate Convergence Point, disguised as a refugee from one of the destroyed human colonies. She altered her appearance and took on the identity of a traumatized survivor seeking shelter. Kate spent 6 months on Convergence Point living among aliens and slowly gathering intelligence. She worked menial jobs in the station's lower levels where nobody paid attention to humans. She listened to conversations in bars where Council military officers drank and boasted about their superiority. She bribed corrupt station officials for access to data terminals. Kate discovered that the Council was complacent after 10,000 years of unchallenged dominance. Their military doctrine had not changed in centuries because they never needed to adapt. The intelligence Kate gathered was invaluable. She learned that Council species had grown soft and comfortable in their power. Most Council worlds had not fought a real war in living memory. Their soldiers were trained but inexperienced. Their ships were powerful, but their tactics were predictable. Kate also discovered political tensions within the Council. Many member species were uncomfortable with Xanthari aggression, but were too afraid to speak against them. The Council was not as unified as it appeared from the outside. Kate transmitted her findings back to Earth using encrypted channels hidden in commercial data streams. General Hayes studied the intelligence reports and began to see weaknesses in what had seemed like an invincible enemy. The Council relied on overwhelming force and technological superiority, but they had forgotten what it meant to fight an enemy that refused to give up. Marcus realized that humanity's greatest advantage was not technology or numbers, but the simple fact that humans had never stopped making war on each other. Humanity understood violence in ways the Council had forgotten. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council debated what to do about the human problem. High Archon Vel Nasir assured the Council that humanity would be completely subjugated within weeks, once the Xanthari fleet was ready to move. He dismissed reports that Earth was building warships and called human resistance futile. Other Council members expressed concern about the destruction of New Terra. The Dalvari representative argued that such brutality was beneath civilized species. The Kryn ambassador suggested offering humanity another chance to surrender peacefully. Vel Nasir silenced the dissenters with reminders of Council law and the need to maintain order. He proposed a vote to authorize a full military campaign against Earth. The Council would assemble a grand fleet that would jump to the human home system and destroy any resistance. Once Earth's defenses were eliminated, the surviving humans would be placed under permanent Xanthari control. The Council voted and the measure passed, though. Several species abstained rather than vote in favor. The Xanthari transmitted one final ultimatum to Earth. They gave humanity 72 hours to surrender all weapons and submit to Council authority. If humanity refused, the Xanthari promised to glass Earth the same way they had destroyed New Terra. The message was broadcast across all human channels so everyone could hear the threat. The Xanthari expected terror and capitulation. They had no idea what was actually coming. General Hayes read the ultimatum and smiled for the first time in months. He called a meeting of Earth's military commanders and laid out his plan. They would not wait for the Council fleet to arrive at Earth, where the enemy would have all the advantages. Instead, humanity would strike first, hitting the enemy where they least expected it. Marcus proposed Operation Retribution, a direct assault on the Xanthari homeworld itself. The other commanders thought he was insane, but Marcus explained his reasoning with cold logic. The Xanthari believed themselves untouchable. Their homeworld had not been attacked in recorded history. They would never expect a primitive species like humanity to have the courage or capability to strike at the heart of their empire. A successful attack would humiliate the Xanthari and show the entire Council that humanity was not prey to be hunted, but a predator to be feared. The psychological impact would be worth more than destroying 100 ships in defensive battles. President Carter gave her approval for Operation Retribution. Earth's new fleet began moving into position. Crews that had trained for months were given their final briefings. Pilots checked their fighters and ran simulations one last time. Engineers inspected every system on every ship. Across Earth, families said goodbye to sons and daughters who were about to jump into the unknown. Everyone knew this might be humanity's last throw of the dice. Dr. Sophie Blake delivered the final weapon shipments to the fleet. Each warship now carried the most advanced destructive technology humanity had ever created. Ryan Foster confirmed that all systems were operational, and the fleet was ready to launch. Lieutenant Kate Morgan transmitted her last intelligence update from Convergence Point, giving the fleet real-time data on Xanthari defensive positions. Everything was in place. General Hayes broadcast a message to the fleet before they departed. He told them that they were about to do something no species had done in 10,000 years. They were going to punch the Council right in the face and show the galaxy that humanity would not go quietly into the night. He reminded them of New Terra and the 150,000 souls who died there. He told them to fight with honor, but to fight without mercy. The enemy had started this war, but humanity would finish it. Captain Nicole Reed stood on the bridge of the EDF Valiant and felt her heart pound as the countdown reached its final seconds. Around her, in the vast darkness of space, floated 200 human warships, all waiting for the order to jump. This was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, and they were about to do something that every military advisor had called suicide. They were going to attack Xantheris Prime, the homeworld of the most powerful military empire in the known galaxy. Nicole had been a test pilot before the war, flying experimental craft that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Now she commanded Earth's flagship, leading humanity's first offensive operation against an alien civilization. She thought about her daughter back on Earth and wondered if she would ever see her again. Then she pushed those thoughts aside because a commander could not afford doubt. The Xanthari had murdered 150,000 humans, and it was time they paid for that crime in blood. Navigator Chris Palmer called out the final coordinates. Chris had discovered something remarkable. While studying the star charts that Lieutenant Kate Morgan had stolen from Convergence Point, there was an uncharted jump route that led directly into the Xanthari system, bypassing all the outer defense stations and patrol routes. The route passed through an unstable region of space that most species avoided, but Chris had calculated that human ships could make the journey safely. It was risky, but risk was something humans understood better than most. General Hayes gave the order, and 200 ships jumped simultaneously. The universe twisted around them as they traveled faster than light, through dimensions that human science barely understood. Nicole gripped her command chair as the Valiant shook from the turbulence of the unstable jump route. Alarms blared and systems flickered, but the ship held together. After what felt like hours but was actually only minutes, the fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, and Nicole saw Xantheris, Prime hanging in space before them. The Zenthari homeworld was beautiful in a cold, metallic way. Massive cities covered the surface, glittering with lights and technological marvels. Orbital platforms surrounded the planet like a crown, each one bristling with weapons and shields. Hundreds of ships moved between the platforms, ranging from small patrol craft to massive battleships. This was the heart of the Zenthari Empire, and it had not been attacked in over 5,000 years. The Zenthari were completely unprepared for what happened next. Their sensors detected the human fleet, but the defenders could not believe what they were seeing. No enemy had ever penetrated this deep into Zenthari space, and certainly no primitive species like humanity. The defense coordinator assumed it was a sensor malfunction and ordered a diagnostic check. That moment of hesitation cost the Zenthari dearly. Nicole gave the order to attack, and the human fleet spread out like a swarm of angry hornets. The Valiant led the charge straight toward the largest orbital platform. Zenthari ships finally began to respond, but they were moving to defensive positions designed to repel an attack from the outer system, not from ships that had appeared in their midst. Human vessels were smaller and faster than Zenthari warships, and the pilots used that advantage ruthlessly. The first salvo from Earth's fleet tore through space. Kinetic railguns fired projectiles that moved so fast they appeared as streaks of light. The Zenthari energy shields that had protected them for millennia were designed to deflect laser and plasma weapons. They did almost nothing against solid metal moving at relativistic speeds. The rounds punched through shields and armor like paper. 3 Zenthari battleships exploded in the first 30 seconds of combat. The Zenthari fleet commander finally realized this was not a drill and ordered all ships to engage. Zenthari vessels were powerful, and their weapons could vaporize a human ship with a single direct hit. But the human pilots had been training for this moment for months, and they flew like demons. They used the orbital platforms as cover, forcing the Zenthari to risk hitting their own structures. They coordinated their attacks, overwhelming individual targets with fire from multiple directions at once. Captain Nicole Reed brought the Valiant in close to the main orbital shipyard. The structure was enormous, capable of constructing a dozen warships simultaneously. It represented centuries of Zenthari engineering and was one of the most valuable military assets in the Empire. Nicole ordered every weapon on the Valiant to fire at once. Missiles streaked across the gap, followed by railgun rounds that hammered into the shipyard's superstructure. Secondary explosions rippled through the facility as fuel stores and ammunition depots detonated. Across the battlefield, human ships executed their assigned missions with brutal efficiency. Strike teams targeted communication arrays, leaving the Zenthari unable to coordinate their defense. Fighter squadrons strafed defensive platforms, methodically destroying weapon emplacements. Larger vessels engaged the Zenthari capital ships, keeping them occupied, while the rest of the fleet did its work. Every human crew fought like they had nothing to lose, because in truth they did not. Commander Alex Turner led a special operations team on the most dangerous mission of the battle. His team of 30 soldiers loaded into stealth shuttles and headed straight for the surface of Zentharis. Prime, their target was the Zenthari Admiralty headquarters, where the Empire's top military leaders directed operations. The shuttles evaded the chaos in orbit and descended through the atmosphere, using the battle above as a distraction. The shuttles landed on the roof of the Admiralty building, and Alex's team breached the entrance using plasma cutters. Zenthari security forces responded immediately, but they were ceremonial guards, not combat troops. The human soldiers had been training for urban combat since they were teenagers, and they moved through the building like a surgical strike. They used non-lethal weapons because the mission was capture, not kill. Within 20 minutes, Alex's team had secured 3 Zenthari admirals and was heading back to the shuttles. The battle in orbit raged for 8 hours. Human ships darted between Zenthari vessels, inflicting damage and vanishing before the enemy could respond effectively. The Zenthari had superior firepower, but they fought with tactics that had not changed in centuries. They formed defensive lines and tried to use overwhelming force. The humans refused to fight that battle. They scattered and regrouped using hit-and-run tactics that frustrated the enemy commanders. Nicole watched her tactical display as the mission objectives were achieved one by one. The orbital shipyards were burning ruins. Defense platforms had been reduced to debris. The Zenthari fleet had lost over 60 ships. Human casualties were mounting, but they had known this would be costly. 30 human vessels had been destroyed and another 20 were badly damaged. But they had done what everyone said was impossible. General Hayes transmitted the withdrawal order from Earth. The human fleet began pulling back toward their jump coordinates. Xanthari ships tried to pursue, but they were too slow and too disorganized. Commander Alex Turner's shuttles rejoined the fleet with their captured admirals. Nicole ordered the Valiant to cover the retreat as the rest of the fleet jumped away. She waited until the last human ship was safely away before ordering her own jump. The Valiant vanished from Xanthari's space, leaving behind a scene of destruction that shocked the Xanthari to their core. Their homeworld had been attacked. Their fleets had been humiliated. Their admirals had been captured. The entire galaxy would learn of this defeat, and the myth of Xanthari invincibility would be shattered forever. News of the raid spread through Council space within hours. Species that had lived in fear of the Xanthari for generations suddenly began to wonder if the Empire was as powerful as it claimed. The human fleet regrouped at a secret staging area near the edge of Council space. Nicole reviewed the casualty reports and felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders. They had lost over 3,000 people in the attack. Every death was a name and a face and a family back on Earth that would receive terrible news. But they had also proven something vital. Humanity could fight the Council and win. The captured Xanthari admirals were transported to Earth under heavy guard. When they arrived, they expected torture and execution. Instead, they were placed in clean, comfortable cells and given medical treatment for their injuries. Human guards treated them with professional courtesy. The admirals were confused because the Xanthari showed no mercy to captured enemies. They could not understand why these primitive humans were following rules of war that the Council had abandoned long ago. President Helen Carter visited the prisoners personally. She told them through translators that humanity fought with honor, even against enemies who had shown them none. The admirals would be treated according to human conventions and would not be harmed. Helen asked them to carry a message back to the Council when this war was over. She wanted the Council to know that humanity had not wanted this conflict, but now that it had begun, humans would see it through to the end. High Archon Velnasir received reports of the attack on Xantharis Prime, and his rage knew no bounds. He smashed furniture in his chambers and ordered the immediate execution of every officer who had failed to prevent the human raid. The other Council members watched in growing alarm as Velnasir demanded that the Council mobilize every ship in the galaxy to crush humanity once and for all. The Archon would not rest until Earth was nothing but radioactive ash drifting in space. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from all 47 member species gathered to discuss the human problem. For the first time in millennia, the Council was afraid. A species they had dismissed as primitive insects had struck at the heart of the mighty Xanthari Empire. If the Xanthari could be humbled, then no Council species was safe. The debates grew heated as different factions argued about how to respond. Some species wanted to negotiate with humanity and find a peaceful solution. Others demanded immediate, overwhelming retaliation. The Xanthari delegation made it clear that any species refusing to join the war effort would be considered traitors to the Council. Slowly and reluctantly, the Council voted to authorize a grand military campaign against Earth. 15 species agreed to contribute ships to an armada that would number over 5,000 vessels. It would be the largest fleet assembled in recorded history. Back on Earth, General Hayes received intelligence about the Council's plans. He knew that the real war was just beginning, and that the raid on Xantharis Prime was only the opening move. But humans had proven they could hit back, and that changed everything. The species of Earth would not go into the darkness quietly. They would fight, and they would make the galaxy remember humanity's name. The Galactic Council assembled the largest military force in living memory. Over 5,000 warships gathered at staging points across Council space, representing 15 different species that had pledged their fleets to. Velnasir was consumed by rage and desperation. His plans for galactic domination were exposed and collapsing around him. The Archon decided that if he could not rule the galaxy, then he would at least destroy the humans who had ruined everything. He ordered the remaining Xanthari fleet to jump directly to Earth for a final assault. Velnasir would glass the human homeworld personally and show the galaxy that the Xanthari were still the dominant power. General Hayes received warning from the Dalvari that the Xanthari fleet was moving toward Earth. He immediately began recalling all human ships for the defense of their homeworld. President Helen Carter ordered a planetary evacuation, moving as many civilians as possible to underground shelters and remote colonies. Earth's orbital defenses were activated and every weapon system was brought online. Humanity prepared for the battle that would decide whether their species lived or died. What neither the humans nor the Xanthari expected was what happened next. Admiral Thexalon made a decision that would define his legacy. He gathered the Kryn fleet and jumped to Earth not to attack it but to defend it. The Admiral sent a message to General Hayes explaining that the Council's purpose was to prevent tyranny, and the Xanthari had become the very thing the Council was meant to oppose. The Kryn would stand with humanity against oppression. The Xanthari fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system like a swarm of locusts descending on a harvest field. High Archon Velnasir stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the blue planet that had caused him so much trouble. He commanded nearly 1,500 warships, all that remained of the once mighty Coalition fleet. The Archon intended to turn Earth into a lifeless rock and prove that defying the Xanthari was suicide. General Marcus Hayes watched the enemy fleet approach on tactical displays in the command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Around him, hundreds of officers coordinated the defense of humanity's homeworld. Every ship that Earth possessed was moving into defensive positions. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons. The moon had been converted into a massive fortress. Humanity had prepared for this moment, knowing it would eventually come. President Helen Carter walked through the streets of Denver where civilians were being evacuated to underground shelters. People moved in orderly lines carrying whatever possessions they could manage. Children cried while parents tried to remain calm. Helen stopped to speak with families, telling them that humanity would survive this day. She did not know if that was true, but a leader's job was to give people hope even in the darkest hours. The Xanthari fleet accelerated toward Earth, expecting to crush any resistance quickly. Then Admiral Thexalon and the Kryn fleet appeared between the Xanthari and their target. Velnasir could not believe what he was seeing. He opened a communication channel and demanded to know why the Kryn were protecting humans. Thexalon responded that he was defending the principles the Council was founded upon. The Xanthari had become tyrants and the Kryn would not support oppression. More ships began arriving in Earth's orbit. The Dalvari sent their merchant fleet converted into makeshift warships. 3 other Council species that had withdrawn from the Coalition now came to humanity's aid. They explained that they would not stand by while the Xanthari committed genocide. Velnasir found himself facing not just humans but a coalition of species that had finally found the courage to oppose Xanthari. Aggression, the battle that followed, would be recorded as the largest space engagement in galactic history. Thousands of ships clashed in the space around Earth. Xanthari vessels fired devastating energy weapons that could vaporize smaller craft. Human railguns responded with kinetic rounds that punched through shields. The Kryn used advanced targeting systems to coordinate their fire. Dalvari ships harassed the enemy flanks. The battle was chaos and violence on a scale never before witnessed. Captain Nicole Reed commanded the human defense fleet from the bridge of the EDF Valiant. Her ships fought with desperate courage, knowing that their families were on the planet below. Human pilots rammed damaged vessels into Xanthari battleships when their weapons ran dry. Crews kept fighting even as their ships fell apart around them. Every human understood that surrender meant extinction, and they would die before allowing that to happen. Admiral Thexalon proved why he was considered the finest military commander in Council space. He positioned his fleet to maximum advantage using Earth's moon as a defensive anchor. Kryn warships formed a wall of steel between the Xanthari and the planet. When Xanthari forces tried to flank the defense, Thexalon had reserves waiting to crush them. The Admiral fought not with reckless aggression but with calculated precision that frustrated every Xanthari attack. High Archon Velnasir grew increasingly desperate as the battle turned against him. His fleet was larger, but the defenders were fighting with unity and purpose, while his own ship struggled with coordination. The Archon decided that if he could not win through conventional means, he would strike directly at Earth itself. Velnasir ordered his flagship to break through the defensive line and make a suicide run at the planet. He would ram his vessel into Earth's surface and crack the planet like an egg. The Xanthari flagship was massive and heavily armored. It powered through the defensive formations, taking devastating damage but refusing to stop. Smaller ships tried to intercept but were swatted aside by the flagship's weapons. The vessel plowed toward Earth like an avalanche and nothing seemed able to halt its advance. In the command center, General Hayes watched the approach and knew that if the flagship reached the surface, millions would die, even if they stopped the rest of the fleet. Captain Nicole Reed saw what was happening and made a decision without waiting for orders. She turned the Valiant toward an intercept course and pushed the engines to maximum. Her crew realized what she was planning and no one objected. They had all volunteered to protect Earth, and this was what they had signed up for. The Valiant accelerated toward the Zenthari flagship on a collision course. Nicole opened a fleet-wide channel and told every ship to continue the fight no matter what happened. She said it had been an honor to serve with them and that she knew humanity would prevail. Then she ordered her crew to evacuate in the escape pods. Most of the crew refused to leave, but Nicole made it a direct order. She told them they were needed for the next battle and that she would finish this one. Reluctantly, the crew began abandoning ship, leaving only Nicole on the bridge. The EDF Valiant struck the Zenthari flagship at a speed that turned both vessels into a miniature star. The explosion lit up Earth's orbit brighter than the sun. The flagship disintegrated along with the Valiant. High Archon Velnasir died instantly, consumed by the blast that marked the end of his ambitions. Without their leader, the remaining Zenthari forces began to falter and break apart. Admiral Thexalon pressed the advantage and ordered all Allied ships to attack. The Zenthari fleet that had come to destroy Earth was itself destroyed. Some vessels tried to flee, but human pursuit craft hunted them down. Others surrendered and were taken prisoner. By the end of the third day of battle, the Zenthari military power was completely broken. Debris from thousands of ships filled Earth's orbit, creating a memorial to the cost of freedom. The surviving defenders regrouped and began rescue operations. Thousands of escape pods floated in space containing crews from both sides. Human ships rescued Zenthari survivors along with their own people, because that was what civilized beings did. General Hayes ordered that all prisoners be treated with dignity and given medical care. The war was over, and it was time to show the galaxy what humanity truly stood for. On Earth, the evacuation shelters opened and people emerged to see the sun still shining. They had survived. President Helen Carter addressed the planet and the galaxy, explaining that humanity had not wanted this war, but had been forced. Oh, destroy humanity. The sheer scale of the Armada would have terrified any civilization, but the humans had stopped being afraid the day New Terra burned. Admiral Thexlon of the Kryn Empire was given command of the coalition fleet because he was considered the most competent military leader in council. Space Thexlon was a cautious commander who believed in careful planning and overwhelming force. He had studied the human raid on Zentheris Prime, and unlike most council members, he did not dismiss it as luck. The humans had shown tactical creativity and a willingness to take risks that impressed him despite himself. Thexlon knew this would not be an easy campaign even with numerical superiority. He organized his fleet into battle groups and began the slow advance toward human space. High Archon Velnasir wanted the fleet to jump directly to Earth and end the war in one devastating assault. Thexalon refused and explained that rushing into unknown territory against an enemy that had already proven resourceful was foolish. The Zenthari leader was furious but could not overrule the admiral without undermining council unity. Velnasir had to content himself with regular demands for progress reports and complaints about the slow pace of the advance. While the council fleet moved through space, something unexpected was happening behind their lines. Captain Laura Mitchell commanded a human merchant vessel that had been secretly modified for intelligence work. Laura was a civilian before the war, trading goods between human colonies, but now she used her ship to make contact with species that were unhappy with council leadership. She approached the Dalvari, who were a peaceful civilization of traders and scholars. The Dalvari had voted against the war but were forced to contribute ships under threat of Zenthari retaliation. Laura met with Dalvari merchants in secret locations far from council oversight. She explained that humanity had not wanted this war and only sought to live freely. The Dalvari listened with sympathy because they too chafed under council restrictions that favored military powers like the Zenthari. After several meetings, the Dalvari agreed to share intelligence about council fleet movements in exchange for human protection if the Zenthari ever turned on them. The information from the Dalvari proved invaluable. General Hayes now knew exactly where the council fleet was and how it was organized. He could see supply convoys moving between Council worlds and communication relays that kept the massive fleet coordinated. Hayes decided that humanity would not wait for the Council to reach Earth. Instead, human forces would spread across Council space like a plague, striking at targets that would cripple the enemy's ability to wage war. Colonel Nathan Pierce led the guerrilla campaign against Council supply lines. Nathan had been a special forces operator who specialized in asymmetric warfare. He commanded a task force of 30 small, fast ships that could strike and vanish before the enemy knew what happened. His first target was a major supply depot in the Corev system where the Council stored fuel and ammunition for their advancing fleet. Nathan's ships jumped into the Corev system and found the depot protected by only a small garrison. The Council had never needed to guard their rear areas before, and they did not realize how vulnerable they were. Human ships hit the depot with missiles and railgun fire. Fuel tanks exploded, sending flames into space. Ammunition stores detonated in chain reactions that destroyed storage facilities. Nathan's force was gone before Council reinforcements arrived, leaving behind burning wreckage. Over the following weeks, Nathan and other guerrilla commanders hit dozens of targets across Council territory. They destroyed communication arrays, leaving Council forces unable to coordinate. They raided shipyards that were building replacement vessels. They ambushed small patrol groups and supply convoys. Each attack was minor in scale, but together, they forced the Council to divert ships from the main fleet to protect their infrastructure. Dr. Sophie Blake continued developing new weapons on Earth. Her latest creation was an artificial intelligence system that could coordinate targeting across entire fleets. The AI processed data from thousands of sensors simultaneously and identified weak points in enemy formations faster than any organic mind could. Sophie also perfected gravity mines that could be deployed around jump points. When enemy ships tried to use those routes, the mines would activate and tear the vessels apart with artificial gravity wells. Admiral Thexlon began to understand the true nature of his enemy as report after report came in of human attacks across Council space. The humans were not fighting a conventional war. They were dismantling the Council's infrastructure piece by piece while avoiding major fleet engagements. Thexlon realized with growing respect that the humans understood something the Council had forgotten. War was not just about big battles, but about logistics and morale, and the will to keep fighting. The Admiral decided he needed to speak with his human counterpart. Through neutral intermediaries, Thexlon requested a secret meeting with General Hayes. The request surprised Hayes, but he agreed because he was curious what the Council's top commander wanted to discuss. They arranged to meet on an abandoned research station in neutral space. Both commanders arrived with minimal security and sat across from each other in a bare conference room. Thexlon spoke first. He told Hayes that he respected human courage and tactical skill. The Admiral admitted that the Council had underestimated humanity, and that the war was not going as the Council had expected. Hayes listened carefully, trying to determine if this was a trick or genuine communication. Thexlon then revealed something shocking. He said that many Council species were horrified by what the Zenthari had done to New Terra, but were too afraid to oppose them openly. Hayes asked why Thexlon was telling him this. The Kryn Admiral explained that he had spent his life serving the Council because he believed in its purpose. The Council was supposed to prevent any single species from dominating others and maintain peace among the stars, but the Zenthari had corrupted that purpose and were using the Council as a weapon to enforce their will. Thexlon could not openly defy them, but he could ensure that Hayes knew the truth about Council politics. The two commanders talked for hours. Hayes learned that the Council was far less unified than it appeared. Several species contributed ships only because they feared Zenthari punishment. Others were looking for any excuse to withdraw from the war without appearing weak. Thexlon suggested that if Hayes could prove the Zenthari were a threat to all Council species, then the coalition might fracture. Hayes thanked the Admiral for the information, and both men returned to their fleets with new understanding. General Hayes immediately put Human Intelligence Services to work, investigating Zenthari activities. Captain Nicole Reed's division spent weeks analyzing captured Zenthari communications and documents. What they discovered was explosive. The Zenthari had been secretly planning to overthrow the Council's collective leadership and establish themselves as sole rulers of the galaxy. They had been building hidden fleets and making alliances with criminal organizations. The attack on humanity was just the first step in a larger plan for Xanthari domination. Hayes knew this information could change everything, but he needed to prove it to the galaxy. Human hackers led by specialists Emma Price and Tyler Grant worked to break Xanthari encryption. Emma was a brilliant programmer who had spent years finding security vulnerabilities. Tyler was a former corporate security expert who knew how to navigate complex digital systems. Together, they cracked the Xanthari military network and extracted proof of the conspiracy. The evidence was damning. Secret communications between Xanthari admirals discussed eliminating council leadership. Financial records showed payments to mercenary groups. Strategic documents outlined plans to conquer council worlds one by one. Hayes had everything he needed, but he had to broadcast it in a way that the entire galaxy would see. He contacted the Dalvari, who had access to civilian communication networks across council space. On a day that would be remembered throughout galactic history, Emma and Tyler simultaneously broadcast the Xanthari conspiracy across every civilian channel in council space. Billions of aliens watched as the proof of Xanthari treachery appeared on their screens. The broadcast included translated documents, audio recordings, and video evidence. It was impossible to deny or dismiss. The Xanthari had been planning to betray everyone. The political impact was immediate and catastrophic for the council. 7 species announced they were withdrawing their ships from the coalition fleet. Their representatives declared that they would not fight to help the Xanthari oppress others. Protests erupted on council worlds as civilians demanded their government stop supporting the war. The Dalvari formally broke from the council and requested human protection from inevitable Xanthari retaliation. Admiral Thexelon received orders from his government to withdraw Kryn forces from the coalition. The Kryn Empire had no interest in helping the Xanthari conquer the galaxy. Other species followed suit, and within days the 5,000-ship armada had shrunk to barely 2,000. Most of the remaining vessels belonged to the Xanthari and their closest allies. High Archon Velnasir found himself commanding a much smaller force than he had started with. To fight for their right to exist, she announced that Earth would work with Admiral Thexelon and the other allied species to create a new order in the galaxy based on freedom and equality. The Old Galactic Council was formally dissolved in the weeks following the battle. Representatives from dozens of species gathered on Earth to establish what they called the Galactic Assembly. The new organization would have no single dominant power, but would operate through consensus and mutual respect. Every species, regardless of size or military strength, would have an equal voice. The Assembly's first law prohibited unprovoked attacks and forced subjugation of other civilizations. General Marcus Hayes retired from military service to help rebuild New Terra. The colony that had been destroyed by the Xanthari would rise again as a symbol of human resilience. Survivors who had fled returned to lay the foundations for new cities. Other species sent aid and workers to help with reconstruction. What had been a human colony would become a shared world where different civilizations could learn to live together in peace. President Helen Carter became Earth's first representative to the Galactic Assembly. She worked tirelessly to build relationships with other species and ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. The Assembly voted to establish a memorial on Earth honoring all who died in the war, both human and alien. The monument would remind future generations that peace required constant vigilance and that freedom was worth any price. The Xanthari Empire was broken, but not destroyed. The species was placed under Assembly supervision, and their military was limited to defensive forces. Many Xanthari welcomed the change, having grown tired of their leader's aggression. The species began a long process of cultural reform, guided by species that understood the path from militarism to peace. In time, the Xanthari would become productive members of the galactic community. Commander Jake Morrison, who had sacrificed himself at New Terra, was posthumously awarded humanity's highest honor. His name was remembered in songs and stories as the first human to give his life defending others from alien aggression. His daughter Amy followed in his footsteps and joined the new Assembly peacekeeping force. Amy and others like her would ensure that no species would suffer what humanity had endured. Ambassador Lisa Grant, who had survived the initial meeting with the Old Council, addressed the inaugural session of the Galactic Assembly. She spoke of how humanity's retaliation was born not from hatred, but from the fundamental human refusal to submit to tyranny. She explained that humans had offered friendship and been answered with violence, but that humanity still believed in the possibility of a better future. The species of the galaxy had been given a second chance to build something worthy of the stars. The Assembly voted on many new laws and treaties in its early sessions. Trade agreements were established that benefited all species fairly. Scientific knowledge was shared openly, rather than hoarded by the powerful. Exploration fleets were formed with mixed crews from different worlds. The galaxy was truly free for the first time in millennia, and the possibilities seemed endless. Dr. Sophie Blake turned her genius from weapons to peaceful technology. She developed new medical devices and energy systems that improved life across the galaxy. The technologies that had been created to wage war were now being used to heal and build. Sophie often said that humanity's greatest strength was not their ability to fight, but their ability to adapt and grow. Admiral Thexlon worked closely with General Hayes to write the military doctrine for the Assembly. Peacekeeping force, the two former enemies, became close friends united by their shared belief that military power should serve peace, not conquest. They trained a new generation of officers from dozens of species, teaching them that strength meant protecting the weak, not dominating them. Earth's orbital shipyards that had built warships now constructed vessels for exploration and trade. Human engineers shared their knowledge freely with other species. The colonies that had been established before the war grew and prospered. New colonies were founded on worlds across the galaxy, with humans living alongside aliens as neighbors and friends. The final scene of humanity's great retaliation came years after the war ended. Construction began on a joint colony where humans and former council species would build something together. The colony was named Horizon in honor of Commander Morrison and his crew. The first buildings rose from the ground, built by human and alien hands working side by side. Children of different species played together in the streets. The galaxy had learned from its mistakes and chosen a better path. Humanity's retaliation had shaken the Galactic Council to its core, and in doing so had freed the galaxy from tyranny. The humans who had been dismissed as primitive insects had proven themselves to be protectors of freedom and champions of justice. The species that had reached for the stars seeking friendship had instead found war, but through that war had brought true peace. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity said no to oppression and yes to a future worth fighting for.